Hello, this is Gina Piscatelli with the first lecture on the human reproductive system for Anatomy and Physiology 2 at Madison College. And the first thing I'd like to do is talk about the fact that our reproductive systems and the organs in those systems are adapted for the process of sexual reproduction. And what this means is that an organism is produced when a male gamete fertilizes a female gamete. So in our species, the genders are dimorphic, they're not the same, and there's a male that produces a haploid cell, which is a gamete, that joins with a female gamete that's also haploid to form a zygote. So that is the single cell that forms due to fertilization. And then this zygote travels throughout the female reproductive tract and develops in the uterus. So the zygote will develop within the female. Now, that might seem obvious to you that we reproduce sexually versus asexually. But there are single-celled organisms like bacteria, yeast, and some multicellular organisms, like things as complicated as sponges or cnidarians, that can reproduce asexually with different processes, like budding, for example. Sponges can bud off a group of cells, and those cells can take root and grow into a fully functional organism. Or bacteria use the process of binary fission, where their single cell divides into two, etc., and the genetic material is passed on as that division takes place. For us, in order to get a complete set of chromosomes, we have to have a male gamete join with a female gamete. And this picture that you're looking at is a picture of an oocyte, a female oocyte, which is round, coated in some cells that we refer to as the corona radiata, and 5 sperm, one of which has been successful in penetrating that corona radiata to get to the oocyte. So that's the process of fertilization there. So just to review a little bit about the stages of a human life cycle, adults, male and females, produce gametes, and they do so by a process called meiosis, and that's followed by some maturation processes that I'll just refer to as gametogenesis right now. But regardless, the female produces a haploid oocyte or ovum, and haploid means that there's 23 chromosomes that don't have pairs or have a partner, and the male produces a spermatozoon, which is also haploid, having only 23 chromosomes, not paired, and then they join through the process of fertilization. The single cell that develops is called a zygote, and now the genome is complete. There are 46 total chromosomes, or 23 pairs, and we refer to this as a diploid cell. So we were all single cells at one time, and then through a process of development, we became an embryo, and then a fetus, and then an infant, and a toddler, and a teenager, and eventually we became adults, right? The process of development does involve cell division because, of course, we do not stay single-celled organisms. We're multicellular. And the process by which we make new cells is mitosis. So those are new body cells, or somatic cells. So mitosis is what the cell division process that contributes to development and growth. Meiosis, another cell division process, is what contributes to, or what causes, the formation of these haploid cells. So let's just review the human genome to make sure we understand the pairing of chromosomes and the chromosome number in our somatic cells as well as our gametes. So the human genome consists of 46 chromosomes in somatic or body cells. Not every single cell, of course, has 46 chromosomes, because if you think of a red blood cell, the red blood cell doesn't even have a nucleus. So that mature cell doesn't have any chromosomes. Okay, but most body cells do, and the number they have is 46. And chromosomes have homologous partners, if you will. So here, notice chromosome number 1. There are 2 chromosomes that are approximately the same length, and they have these points of constriction where the centromere is in the exact same location. And they'll carry the same type of genetic information, like height or eye color or coding for an enzyme. So we have 23 pairs like that, 23 pairs of homologous chromosomes. But in a gamete, they're no longer paired. So we will have one copy of each pair in a single gamete. So one of chromosome 1, one of chromosome 2, one of chromosome 3, etc. So there'll be 23 chromosomes in a gamete. Now let's talk about the names, or I guess categories that these chromosomes belong to. 22 of the 23 pairs are called autosomal chromosomes, typical somatic type chromosomes. But there's one pair, chromosome pair 23, that are called sex chromosomes. And there's 2 different forms of these sex chromosomes. They don't look homologous, right? They do end up pairing during meiosis, so they divide into gametes or distributed into gametes much like the other chromosomes are, but they might not look the same. So there's one form called the X chromosome, and there's another form called the Y chromosome. And that X and Y is written here, but I didn't know if you could see it. If a zygote inherits 2 X chromosomes, it's destined to form a female organism. If instead the zygote inherits 1 X and 1 Y, then the zygote will become a male organism or develop into a male organism. So it's this 23rd pair that determines the gender of an organism, at least chromosomally. There's a lot of other things that contribute to gender that we're discovering, but that's what we know about chromosome distribution. So whichever chromosome the sperm carries, that's really going to determine the gender of the offspring. Because remember, females only have an X chromosome, so every single oocyte will always have an X chromosome. If the sperm brings an X chromosome with it, then the diploid number, or the zygote cell, will have 2 X chromosomes and a female will develop. If instead the sperm brings in a Y, then of course we would have an XY 23rd chromosome pair, and the organism would develop into a male. So the functions of the reproductive system, of course, is to reproduce or make offspring. So we're going to start with the male reproductive system and just discuss what the function of the male reproductive system is besides producing sperm. The male reproductive system is also responsible for delivering sperm to the female reproductive system. But the female reproductive system has a lot more roles than that. Yes, ova are produced by the reproductive system, but the ova are released from ovaries that have to make their way at least to the uterine tubes to meet up with the sperm. And then if fertilization takes place, then the female reproductive system needs to provide an environment that's hospitable for the development of an embryo. Then the female reproductive system needs to make that environment inhospitable and encourage birth of the organism, right? Expel the organism, if you will. So the female reproductive system we're going to see is a little bit more complicated in its physiology because it has to do these two seemingly opposing sorts of functions in addition to producing a gamete. But as I mentioned, we're really going to start with male reproductive system physiology. This is just an introduction to begin with. So in both male and female, the organ that produces the gametes is called a primary organ. And we know in males that's the testis or two testes. In females, that's the ovary or two ovaries. So the male testes produces the sperm, but it also produces testosterone, which is important for the development of the male reproductive system, as well as the appearance of secondary sex characteristics, like a deeper voice, facial hair, muscular build, things like that. The female ovaries, yes, produce ova, but also produce two hormones, estrogens and progesterone. And we're going to see that has a role in the status of the uterus and whether or not it is ready to house an embryo or ready to give birth to an infant, I guess. So primary organs are the gamete producing organs, testis and ovary. The secondary organs in both male and female are required for fertilization or development of the embryo to occur. So in the male, that's going to be the penis, which is important for delivery of the sperm into the female reproductive tract, specifically into the vagina, and the scrotum that holds the testes outside the body cavity, as well as the spermatic cord and all the ducts that carry that sperm to the urethra. So those are secondary organs of the male. In the female, in addition to the vagina, the uterus, as well as the uterine tubes or fallopian tubes, are considered secondary sex characteristics. In addition, females have labia, which we'll talk about probably next week, and those help to protect the opening to the vagina. It turns out that there are some common features of the male and female reproductive systems. For example, the primary organs, the testes and the ovaries, are considered homologous structures. What homologous means is to share a common origin during embryonic development. So this means that there's a group of cells in a developing embryo that will either become a testes or an ovary. And they're usually in the same positions within the abdominal pelvic cavity. If the Y chromosome is present, of course we know that that's going to cause development of a testis, and there's a single gene on that Y chromosome that initiates the development. It's called the SRY gene. I don't know what that stands for actually. In the absence of this gene or the Y chromosome, then that group of cells will default to forming ovaries. So the female morphology or anatomy, I guess, is the default. But if this gene product, SRY gene product, is present, then testes will develop. Now, any further sexual differentiation between males and females, aside from just development of the ovaries, but further development of those primary organs as well as secondary organs, depends upon the presence of the hormone testosterone. So even if there's a Y chromosome and this gene, the SRY gene, the testosterone is needed to complete the development of the testes, as well as form the secondary organs. Another common feature of the male and female reproductive systems is that production of gametes as well as sex hormones called testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are regulated by hormones that are the same or sort of the same in both males and females. So the hormonal regulation that causes the production of gametes is very similar in both genders. So first, the hypothalamus, around the time of puberty, releases gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which is abbreviated GnRH, and that travels in the hypothalamal portal system, portal vessels, to the anterior pituitary. And the anterior pituitary, in response to GnRH, makes two hormones. We've learned them in A&P1, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone, but we really just learned them as LH and FSH. So those two hormones will then travel in the bloodstream to the primary organs, the gonads, the testes and the ovaries, and it's the testes and the ovaries that then produce what we call the sex hormones. So the testes produces testosterone, which is needed to make sperm. The female ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone. It turns out estrogen is needed to actually cause meiosis and production of ova, but also progesterone is needed for maintaining the uterus, and we'll talk about that in more detail in subsequent lectures. Thank you.